I want you to know there was some debate about this hat. I wanted to wear this hat, and it doesn't match with the camera, but neither does a shining forehead. So I'm going to wear the hat. Keith's mother prevailed. Thank you. Anyway, I want to share with you, I grew up on a ranch, working on ranches. It was a wonderful life, but it came with some codes. One of those codes was, if you got bucked off your horse, you got back on. Didn't matter if he's going to buck you off again, you got back on. That was the code. Another code was that grown men don't cry. And the third code was, if you got hurt or life was tough, you didn't gripe and complain. You just cowboyed up and you moved on as best you could. I lived that code for 60 years. I broke it for the first time in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. I was there with my son. I was there like I'm dressed now, minus a baseball cap. We had parked our car on the Potomac River. We had walked the length of the National Mall, past the reflecting pool, the Washington Monument, to the Capitol building, and I spent almost the entire day in the Library of Congress. I loved that place. But we realized that by the end of the day, it was starting to get dark, and we had a 2-mile walk the length of that mall to get back to our car on the Potomac River. I was in cowboy boots. You don't jog well in cowboy boots. We made that journey to get to our car. We got close to the Lincoln Memorial. And I decided that if I went through this little wooded area, that it would be a shortcut to the car. So I entered this area. And I no longer got inside this wooded area. Then in front of me was a statue of 3 soldiers. And I just stepped back and I looked at those statues. And a tear came into my eye. And my son said, "Dad, what's wrong?" I said, "Son, those statues, they look just like me when I was 19 years old. The uniform they're wearing is the uniform I wore. That rifle they're carrying is the rifle I carried. It's bringing back a lot of memories." He said, "Dad, we just stumbled into the Vietnam War Memorial." He said, "The wall is right over there. Would you like to see it?" So we went over to the memorial wall. There's 58,000 names written on that wall of Americans who died in Vietnam. And it's a long wall, and you kind of walk down a grade, and then it kind of flattens out, comes up. We just got on this end of it. Was just enough light left to be able to read the names on the wall, and I started down that wall, and I hadn't gone 5 feet, and I broke my code. Grown men do cry. I couldn't help it. The tears just came rolling down my cheeks. My son looked at me and he said, "Are you okay, Dad?" I said, "Son, I can't do this. I can't walk down this wall. The names of my friends are written on that wall. It's too much." And so he said, "It's okay, Dad." And we turned and walked away. I couldn't even cowboy up and walk down that wall. It brought back a lot of memories. I remembered what it was like when I was 21 years old. And I came home. There was a bitterness in me, but I've been proud to wear that uniform and represent my country. They let me out in Fort Dix, New Jersey. My home was in Oregon. I decided to save money, I would hitchhike home. So I left Fort Dix in my uniform with my thumb. Was not a good time to be a coming home soldier. People would swerve and run me off, make me get out of the road, or they would give me sign language I didn't appreciate. You almost couldn't get a ride if you wore that uniform. You either had to get rid of it or walk a long ways. I got as far as Chicago and I gave up, caught an airplane and went home. But life didn't make any sense anymore to me. And I would eventually travel through 18 countries trying to put the pieces back together. When I was 24 years old, I found myself living alone in the mountains in an old vacant farmhouse. It was Christmas time. I had been away from home other Christmases, but for some reason, this really weighed on me. I wanted to go home, but I didn't have the means to go home. And the closer it got to Christmas, the more I thought about home I knew as a little child. And I visioned that home. I could see 3 little kids who would get so excited when Dad would grab the axe and walk out into the woods by our house to chop down a Christmas tree. I could see us sitting in as a family in the living room, stringing popcorn on a string to put a garland around the Christmas tree. Every decoration on that tree we made by hand. We didn't have the money to buy things. The only thing I remember buying was a little angel that sat on the top of the tree. And then I could see my mom sitting at the piano. And we would gather around the piano when she played and sing the wonderful songs of Christmas. Everything I saw just felt and made me feel loved, but I couldn't get there. And I could even smell the bread that would come out of their old wood cook stove on Christmas Day. I could smell that bread. But I couldn't go home. And then another scene came into my mind, and it was a scene of a little white Christian church that we attended on occasion. But we were there every Christmas. And one Christmas they asked me if I would be a shepherd in the play of the reenactment of the Savior's birth. I was so excited I got to be a shepherd. I could remember standing in front of the congregation with my little staff and looking down at the manger where there was a doll that represented the baby Jesus. And as I looked at that doll, an overwhelming feeling came over me that I was loved by him. And I thought as a little boy, as long as Jesus is my friend, everything's going to be okay. When those scenes drifted from me, another scene came to play. It was the words, "Why have you let the world take from you the God you knew as a little child?" More than anything else that Christmas, what I wanted was to find the Jesus I knew as a little boy. So a couple days before Christmas, I did something I hadn't done for many years. I got down on my knees to ask God if he even lived, if he knew who I was. And as I was on my knees, this wonderful feeling entered my heart, like you lit a fire there, and it warmed my soul. And when I stood up, I felt like I was in the arms of my Savior. 2 days later, Christmas came. I woke up Christmas morning to a very cold house. There was no Christmas tree, no present to open, not even a card. Nobody was going to come by and wish me a Merry Christmas. But in my heart, that fire still burned. So I built a fire in my little wood stove. I wrapped myself in a blanket, and I sat down and read the story of Christmas as recorded in Luke. And as I read that story, I thought, if I could have been there, who would I wanted to have been? And I thought I would have wanted to have been a shepherd. So I placed myself in a story as the shepherd. And as I read that story, I felt the feelings they felt. I went with them to Bethlehem. I saw with them the babe in the manger. And when I looked in the manger, those same feelings I felt as a little boy returned. This overwhelming feeling of being loved. His love needs no reason. And the words came into my mind, everything's going to be okay. Thank you.